Hello. Uh, I want to make a video on why I think the app sandboxing is a bad idea, and I think you should use progressive web app. Okay, you should never use app sandboxing. App sandboxing is a bad idea. Now, why? So first, what is an app sandbox? Well, the app sandbox is basically every of your app has a boundary here. It's not like it will only access resources inside its sandbox. It cannot just accessing, for example, your files without your permission, right? Which is very common. You've seen that on your mobile phones, you're on Android and iOS. Also iPad, right? So now you might think it's a great idea. I can just control the permissions now, right? What's wrong with it? It's better for security because you cannot tamper the other apps, right? Well, here are the issues I'm just trying to talk about today. Now, first, the problem is performance. The lack of sharing. For example, if I tried that on the lab machine before at the university, and I tried Firefox on the Ubuntu, right? The Ubuntu uses the package called Snap. Snap and Flatpak is also like the app sandbox. But the problem here is that it needs 20 seconds to load. The reason is that the Snap package on Linux has to, on the Ubuntu has to, including Flatpak, okay, also app image, whatever. They need to bundle entire libraries, all the system libraries inside the packages. You have glibc, you have C++ library, you have libs to C++, you have X whatever, free desktop, all the junk that needs to be bundled into Mesa drivers, whatever. They need to bundle it inside the apps packages. So you can think here are the problems here. The first is that it breaks shared libraries, right? If you're using a shared library, the shared libraries was supposed to share resources across your different binaries, right? Different applications. But now you have this app thing, you have this app sandboxing. If your libraries, if two apps are using the same shared libraries, they are not going to reuse the library, right? So you have the problem of resource sharing. Also, you have binary bloat because you need to bundle entire shared libraries into the binary. Think of, you need to bundle the Qt, right? What people usually call it Qt, but it's actually Qt. Okay, the Qt DLL shared libraries inside your applications, right? And that is a huge bloat. It's not just on the desktop Linux. It's also on fucking Android, right? In Android, you have the problem too. So you have the binary bloat issues. And also it has difficulty of accessing shared common resources across apps because that was the point, right? You want to restricting them for doing that. But sometimes you have to. So the difficulty is if you try to share the file, you have shared some resources, you want to share common config files, whatever, we want to do it. It's really, really hard to do, right? Because there's no permissions for doing that, right? So the performance is a huge problem because of these problems, right? If you have a common file that can be reused across all your different apps, you duplicate them, you add burdens to your disk, to your memory, right? Because now you have duplications. We can see if you look at Android, what Android does is that they cheat, because since they need to launch the Java ART machine, right? Well, it's not quite standard Java, but you can think of a Java virtual machine, but it's not the standard Java. It's a proprietary Java machine, right? It's not a true Java. You're using that virtual machine, and you think of it. You need to, if you just launch every app, they need to relaunch the virtual machine, the Java virtual machine. And when they launch the Java virtual machine, that is a huge cost, right? Because the Java machine, if you duplicate for each of the app, that's going to cost a lot of resources. So what the Android does is that they cheat. They only fork the new resources, the new apps from the process called Zygote. And after that, you just basically, each app is exactly a mirror when they launch. And now you might say, why is that a problem? The problem is that it's a very bad for security, because now every app, the memory layout of each app is the same now. So you have every app basically in the same app, same memory layout. They cannot do kernel as law. You cannot do the user space as law. If you have a shell library that's compiled with precision independent, every of these apps will not. They won't. Okay, they won't have different memory layout. So you have the problem of if I know as an attacker, I know the memory layout of the app, I won't be able to have access. I will be able to just know the memory address layout of every app. So as long as one app has a security vulnerability, I will be able to crack down every app. You know, that is insane. Okay, that is something that is insane, right? Now you also have driver issues, because the drivers are not bundled within it needs to be bundled within the packages. Now you might say on Android you have some layers to cheat it, you have something to cheat it. But it doesn't solve the problem fundamentally, right? If you're using something like using a custom driver, you're using Mesa, whatever, you want to run a package, whatever, proto it's a hot mess, right? You just cannot do it. The drivers are huge problems. And even you might say, I'm just working quite fine with my games on the Linux, GNU Linux. Well, some people are reporting they have very old drivers. The drivers are not compatible. They have issues like they're unable to play with virtual reality. They have all sorts of drivers issues, right? Because the drivers also need to be bundled with inside the packages. Now you must say drivers are kernel things. Why do you have what it shouldn't matter, right? But the problem is that like NVIDIA drivers, like many other drivers, they have parts that is written that needs to be run outside of the kernel. That need to be run in user space, including Mesa, whatever. A lot of drivers that needs to be run in user space, and what they are doing is just doing memory mapping to the actual drivers, to the physical hardware. So now you're breaking drivers now, because all these apps cannot share the same driver. So the driver is also a part of problems, because your Linux distribution, your distribution manager cannot actually manage them. Maybe it's not as big a problem on Windows and Mac, but it's still think of it as a problem sometimes, right? Because you have libraries. Maybe the library contains some specific code. Now you have the issues with, I cannot upgrade the drivers now. Also, you have kernel vulnerabilities because apps are sandboxed for sure, but the kernel isn't. So if the kernel itself is compromised with security, then it's just app might become useless, right? That's a common thing because you still have kernel. The kernel can have issues. It can have bugs. It can vulnerabilities. It can memory safety, not just memory safety bugs, but other bugs as well, right? If the kernel is crippled, then your app sandbox becomes completely useless. And also you have the functionality are crippled. The one problem is, well known, is the Microsoft Universal Windows platform, and we can see that what Microsoft was talking about, that which is something what the author of Rufus, which is, I think a lot of you know that, is to make the iOS image for Windows image or other operating systems if you want to create the USB image, right? The problem, if you look at what Microsoft said, they try to build a Windows terminal with WinUI. The UWP is basically a app sandbox, but the app sandbox was running by the Microsoft was saying is that they said the apps they want to distribute the UWP app by Microsoft Store, whereas and also the users will not be able to access these restricted locations within the OS, and if you uninstall it, the artifacts will not any artifacts will not on the disk anymore. We reset to the original. And these apps are launched so-called low-integrity app containers, right? So the app container they literally no permission, right? You cannot do anything. Now think of it. If you try to build a Windows terminal, and they have this permission doing like you're not allowed to change in the working directory. You're not allowed to, the app itself has the same restrictions as the external processes. Think of it. Would you even imagine something like a shell or terminal that are gonna unable to run command prompt, PowerShell or Bash, or running something like changing a directories, reading files, launch other processes, or like the case of Rufus, why they are not using the UWP, is that they need to accessing very low level things like accessing the drive, the USB disk, right? They want to changing how the USB drive works. So that is not possible. So here's another problem with these app sandboxing, that you usually crippled on some functionalities, which is also why Chromebook is a bad idea, because or Android is bad. These sandboxes are also bad ideas because of that. Because you cannot do the thing you want to do, like formatting a drive or whatever you want to do. And that is a huge problem. That's also why the iPad, even the Apple is trying to make iPad, the UI even closer to Mac, but still people don't want iPad. They just want Mac because of the restrictions that the iPad is putting here, right? You have to run everything in the App Sandbox, and App Sandbox has a very low permission management. You cannot do a lot of things within it. Just a lot of things you just cannot do on an iPad compared to on a Mac. I'm not mentioning the fucking App Store, right? You basically controlled by the Apple. They don't allow you to put anything in the App Store. So that's a huge problem, right? Here's another problem, which is probably even bigger, is that you have to rewrite all your existing code. Because all the existing libraries, you basically have to rewrite all the existing apps to make them work in the sandbox, right? And often these apps sandboxing are proprietary solutions. They are not by any standard. They don't have any standard to say how I'm going to package them. That is, for example, Flatpak or Snap, whatever package, or Windows apps isolation or anything, or fucking general. We know how bad the development experience of Java is. It's not just because of its Java, right? Java is clearly part of the problem, but I think a larger part of the problem here with why the Android development experience or even iOS development experience being so bad is because they need something like declare your permissions, declare all the things with SAM, whatever, all this crazy stuff. Plus, you need to they want, for example, on Android, the Android vendors, they want your apps to sleep. So they have this thing called activities and intent, right? You have to do the activities, launching activities, like whatever. When the user's switching the app, you need to handle the event, whatever. None of these things are possible if you don't have an app, right? If you have desktop app, you have to rewrite all your existing apps just to work in this sandbox. And usually the sandbox has different restrictions. Some are saying you only allowed to use Java. Some are saying you only allowed to use this or use that. You're not allowed to use JIT, right? Like on iOS. So you basically have to rewrite all your existing apps. The existing apps just don't work. What even worse is that not only you need to write the apps, even you said, I can read the app, I want to rewrite the apps, I could rewrite that, but you also have to rewrite all your dependencies to support this sandbox, which is even harder, right? Because nowadays, it's not like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people don't use the third-party dependencies. But now everyone is using third-party dependencies. With the call chain or build chain, whatever, you don't understand how to change. Even you personally want to support it. But if any of your dependencies within the dependency graph that doesn't support the sandboxing, you're dead in the water, right? You now, this is basically like you're rewriting Windows, you're recreating ecosystem of Windows Phone now. If this code works, then UWP will work. Windows Phone won't die, right? Microsoft won't say you have an app gap with Windows Phone. So it just doesn't work. And as far as I know, no programming language have the design in Sandbox in mind. The libraries don't have that. Just think of it. We are using the C++, C++ stream on Android. You just cannot use it. Maybe you have some ways to use it, but in general, you cannot just directly use it because the app stream doesn't understand how the sandbox works, right? They don't even understand where my files is going to locate, which file directions I'm going to access. That's all information that proprietary APIs has to provide just for you to use it. So you just cannot directly use it, right? You think of if you using a library that is internally, they are trying to use Fstream or using stdi or whatever is to accessing files. Just even a simple things like creating a file, you just cannot do it. Not mentioning creating, just nothing would work on in the app sandbox in here. And they also not quite work well with client GCC or Java. You just cannot use Java, C#, whatever, Python in the app sandbox for these reasons, right? Because they are not have the design of app sampling in mind. Plus the runtime is huge, right? If you're using Java, you basically have to ship the runtime for each platform. You might say, oh, Android is Java. But the Android Java is quite different from the real Java, the modern Java it has, right? They're using completely different things. You just even cannot guarantee you put a library here, the Java libraries put there, they're going to work. It usually doesn't work. It usually doesn't work. So even Java and C# claims to be write ones, compile ones, run everywhere, whatever. That is more like a advertisement. It doesn't work in real world. The real world has more restrictions than this would. And what makes it worse is now we have the Android and iOS duopoly, right? Because you basically have to rewrite the app. And now you have the much matured ecosystem, Android and iOS, you won't be able to have that, right? If you truly believe you can rewrite all your code within App Sandbox, and you are just naive, I would say that. If that's true, then the Windows Phone and Windows platform won't die because nobody wants to rewrite the code, right? The developers don't even want to write code for Android either, right? If you think of it, Android now has the largest market share, twice much market share than Windows does. But still tons of apps, important apps, just cannot be ported on Android, right? We have many Linux-specific applications that could work on Windows even, like GCC, whatever. But none of the alternatives could run on Android, unless you're using some tricks like using Terminus, whatever, which is not quite what Android developers want, right? Plus, it has issues with integration with IDEs. You don't have VS Code. Even you have the terminal, what are you going to do? You just use VM all the time. Because lack of sharing, all these apps has to be rewritten just to support it. That is a huge problem. So there's another problem is that we have better solutions, which is the progressive web app, right? The browser is naturally an app sandbox. It's actually naturally a sandbox. You don't have the problem of the resources are shared by the browser because the browser provides tons of functionalities, right? The JavaScript is designed for the platform which is web. So you just accessing the resources you want to access. You have the shared resources. You don't have the resource sharing problem, unlike the app sandbox has. Attackers, you cannot, if you were an attacker, you cannot just directly attack the kernel because you need to first bypass the browser and then attack the kernel. So you have an extra layer of protection, which is something that the browser itself, that the app sample doesn't have. So the progressive web app is actually safer in that term compared to the app sandbox in here. And then you can also easily update your PWA because it's just a website fundamentally, right? As long as you have the progressive web, which is the website itself, the browser or the OS being patched, any of them being patched. If you have a vulnerability here, as any of them is patched, you are good. You will be good. You have 3 layers of protection. Unlike on the app sample indicates, you basically, if your app is compromised, you basically, if the kernel is compromised, you have no way to fix it because you need on iOS. The users cannot easily upgrade the app. Maybe you're gonna submit that app into the app store, but the app store needs times to to evaluate they probably don't even allow your app to be updated. But with progressive web app, since it's just a website, fundamentally, if you have a vulnerability inside your progressive web app, you basically patch any of them, you don't have the problem. And you don't have a lock-in problem. It's naturally cross-platform. You write a progressive web app, it works on Windows, Linux, Android, whatever. Like this this Office app, which is a progressive web app. Okay, so the Office app I'm using here to demonstrate the presentation. The Office app is also a progressive web app. Okay, so now. Also, the binary side, you can see here's also other problems. Like if we think of the App Sandboxing case here, which is the iOS and Android, you basically have to include all your use case in the App Sandboxing because you need to provide all the use case here. But if you're using progressive web app, the web app will only be less than 2 megabytes because the browser will only load the use case of you're using because it's website, right? The browser will only load the use case the users are actually using. So we can see here's a huge binary size here. This is in 2018. Now we know the iOS and Android apps are even more bloated, right? We know that, right? And some even worse than PWA is that they put entire Chromium inside an app, which defeats the purpose to begin with. If you have that, then why just use your PWA, right? So that's a huge problem. But then a lot of people say, hey, the web is slow, it's not because it's not native, bro. Now my question is that how is the Android's Java's Kotlin being faster than web? How is that part faster? The web can also use WebAssembly too. How could you tell me that the Java, Kotlin, whatever the Java, whatever the kind of junk, is gonna be? They are not native either, right? How would you prove that it's gonna be faster than JavaScript plus WebAssembly thing here? Where C++ compile C++ to WebAssembly, and even you have access to SIMD, SIMD, whatever this crazy stuff, right? You have bit operations, which is the Java Kotlin doesn't provide either. And Windows, you might say, well, Windows you use just C#, but C# is also not quite native, right? Sure, there are people on the effort they want to use .NET native, whatever, but we know that in reality they just work quite poorly. Now, some people are saying, oh, the web browser is also using Kotlin, right? Java Kotlin, the browser, the WebAssembly has to be implemented in Java Kotlin. No, they are using JNI to write they just use the Java C++ to write the UI part, but the core engine of the web browser, if you're using Chromium based or Firefox, they are just C and C++ plus some Rust now, right? So they are native code plus some assembly, right? They are just basically eat out every performance you could. Your Java code just couldn't even compete in that sense compared to web browser now. I've seen tons of native so-called Android apps just basically slow as fuck compared to their website, but they still don't use they don't want to use PWA, right? Because they want to sell your data, right? They want to sell your privacy. So you also ignore the sharing with inside the apps itself, because we have the progressive web app, the PWA here, we can share them, right? Because you only have one shared part, which is a browser engine, and it provides all your functionalities. So now you have a big sharing part. So if you run 10 apps or 100 apps, fundamentally it's just like open 100 tabs, right? That is gonna in tons of sharing, right? Now here I have an experiment. Like we can see this system monitor here. Okay, we have, I think this part is probably, now let's just try this Anduin theme. Let's just play some music here. Okay, let's just try to play this music. Oh, it's gonna crash again. See, here's another problem. It just, I am very unhappy with the X11 junk. Okay, let's just using Fuba 2000, right, which is the music player most desktop users are using on Windows, right? Now we can see if we look at the foobar 2000, I think we can see that. Let's just try to play music here. Now you see, the CPU music immediately jump up to 0.3. Oh, it's gonna crash again. Okay, this junk shit. Like you see, it used at least 0.3%, right? Probably even larger. I have another music player which I'm using now. It's called App Sandbox player, which is a progressive web app, right? It's basically a progressive web app. You install it. I'm gonna disable this part. So, what is this junk? Okay, I'm gonna come back later. Now see, what about this app? You can see, even I'm playing music, the foobar 2000 wasn't even playing anything. This is after X VLAN. I think it's not even X VLAN, it's probably VLAN itself. But we can see, even with that part, the foobar 2000 actually uses more resources than browser. See, think of it. I'm using tons of apps now here with the browser. I'm using the OneDrive, using the GitHub, using the browser itself and the SME player. I'm still, see, I'm just switch to this app, right? So you can see, the foobar 2000, the music more people are using here, they don't even provide better performance than the web app now. And that's for basic stuff. SME player, not mentioning you have the problem of no night core, right? We can try it here. I'm gonna crash again because it's fucking bullshit. They shouldn't switch to fucking VLAN, you know. I'm gonna play this music again now here. Touch friendly. You can see it's more touch friendly. I don't know whether you can hear the music or not. I think you should be able to. It works on your mobile phones, it works on every device in one, works on virtual reality, MetaQuest too. So see, you have an app that is basically cross-platform and it runs, the native doesn't even provide better performance now. I'm running on Linux. If you're running on Windows, it's probably even worse, right? So, and if we go here, you'll see here, another thing here is, I'm gonna show here. The PWS is a smart sleep stuff, right? We can see here, if you're using, we just stop the foobar 2000, it will still cost 0.2% in the background. But if we look at what the Microsoft Edge has, it has the efficiency mode, and it's gonna save resources on tabs. You can also disable the sleeping. You can see it's gonna save resources for sleeping, which means if I'm switching off from the app slept. They won't sleep, which is also a functionality. Particularly Win32 app, Windows binaries they don't provide, right? Win32 doesn't have the ideas of you are sleeping. So the smart sleep stuff also work with progressive web app, which is another very important thing, which is, for example, using your laptop, using your phones, you're gonna sleep your tabs outside when you goes around, right? When you close your lid, whatever. Which is also native usually don't have, right? On Android, they have to do activity in that kind of junk, which is people don't want, right? People have very difficulty on writing the Java, using Android is existing, the Java is a hot mess, right? But another one says, Firefox and Safari don't have good support, then don't use them, right? Let me say, I'm using iPhone, that's why you don't use them. You should not buy iPhone, you shouldn't use Android, and using Microsoft Edge with Android plus extensions, right? But the people say, oh, but Alteryx, the PWA sucks, it sucks, okay? No. None of these apps are PWAs. They are web views. Web views is like electrons. All these Outlook Copilot team that pre-installed Windows, they are web views. They are basically, they themselves bundled a Chromium. You basically can think of that way. So they are called web views. They are just basically a native app that has inside it has a view which is shows the website, right? That is web view apps. They are still native apps, okay? They are native apps. They are not from that perspective, okay? But we know native basically means nothing now. You know what I'm saying? So none of the apps, if you run most of them, they are not sharing resources with your browser. They are different things, okay? They are basically different Chromium instance. That's why they're not good. If you look at the Chromium here, I have the Copilot plus this DeepSeek. They are two progressive web apps, but now they are sharing the same resources, okay? So we're gonna share save the memory and disk here, right? Which is we have two apps now. They're gonna share the same resources. You're not going to launch two browsers. You just launch one, right? Of course, you can complain that the Chromium is doing things like they are putting every browser in the instance into different processes, sub-processes, child processes. But I mean, technically, there's nothing to prevent, let's say, you're just writing a big app that doesn't have these things, right? Just for performance. So that's not a good point. And some people say, use it only native only, bro, native only. My question is, you don't need the most functionality outside the PWAs for native, for social media, for basically social media apps, right? Social media apps. Let's see if we go to here, go permissions. Well, I think we have permissions, right? I don't know whether we can see permissions. Site settings. Do we have site settings? Yeah, we should have see all the cookie and set, right? And we see, no, please, no. I hope we don't get crash the browser. Not wallet, okay. Which one is that? Oh, probably see all the cookies. Permission. Can we see permissions, right? Site data. Can we see SNAE player? Okay. Oh. Yeah. I cannot show you here, but it has NFC. It has Bluetooth. I want to show the permissions here. I cannot see the permission. The permissions, right? View permissions, right? See, just you have so many permissions, right? You have so many permissions, bro. Virtual reality, file editing. Now people are saying you cannot access file, but you can, okay? You have USB device. You can access USB device serial ports. MDMI control and reprogram. You can block intrusive apps, you can do background sync, you can do automatic downloads, you can do augmented reality, virtual reality. I think even Android doesn't directly support it, right? Maybe they have support it, whatever. But I don't know what Windows, they have to have the HoloLens API, but I don't think it's gonna work. So you have virtual reality, you have augmented reality, you have device use, you have window management, you have fonts, you see how many, just so many things that can be done on the browser, right? Just so many permissions. You can naturally perform the permissions. It has even more permissions than your Android app has, right? You don't have to see virtual reality permissions on your Android, right? Payment method, you have NFC, which is the payment method. You have NFC, I think you should have. So you have NFC, you have USB, you have serial ports, you have file editing, you have clipboard, you have augmented reality, whatever, just tons of things. Window management, you have tons of things. Or microphone, using a microphone, looking at a screen, using a notification, push notification. You also support push notification, yeah. You also support push. You see how the push notification, right? So you have push notification, and you have promotions and light sensors. Yeah, it has pop-ups, it has desktop, just so many things, right? USB devices, right? So you just usually don't need the functionality outside the PWA. That's my point. You usually don't need it. It doesn't provide you to prevent you to start a server from the background, right? You can always use it in the front end. If you have this special functionality you want to use, you can just start a web server in the background and then just transfer data, put it at the web server, and put it at the front end, right? Now your native basically is just a simple program and it's cross-platform. It's unlike the app, right? Basically, you have to bundle all your stuff in there, right? If you have specific thing you want to use it, you can always put that part, right? You can always start a web server in the background and put it at the front end, right? There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. Now you might say, I'm running gaming, or maybe you need eat out every performance. You mean native performance? You need the Jenga, you know, with assembly, whatever. However, I would argue that App Sandboxing is not a good idea either, because we're talking about App Sandboxing, right? Because they creep you down a lot of functionality too. Like it's hard to create add-ons for games like Android, for what a Windows example, right? So that's why I think why World of Warcraft just simply don't port it to Android, right? Despite it has more largest market share, because the functionalities are crippled, right? They want to do the stuff like extend add-ons, whatever. How could the Blizzard going to do that? I mean, just be very hard to do that, right? They also don't want to pay the 30% fee, right? You also have issues with the issue you have with PWA. Usually also exists for the sandbox either. In terms of sharing, it is much worse in terms of sharing, right? So this argument doesn't make sense, right? Okay, that is my entire of the slides. If you just hate, you are wrong. Okay, you are wrong. I'm saying you're idiot, right? But that's the entire video I wanna make here. And thank you for watching. It's basically 40 minutes. It's a very long presentation, because I really want to say is that a lot of you just have a simple app sandboxing, that kind of thing. They're very wrong, because now we have better technology, which is a progressive web app. You see, even the Office, the music player, the flow, the EPUB reader, right? The EPUB reader, right? The fucking EPUB reader is working in the progressive web app. We can see this progressive web app even supports. Oh shit. What is that? Okay, I'm not going to show here. You can even. Okay, sorry about that. I don't remember where it is. You don't even need that, right? Even your EPUB reader, your SME player, you have even Windows 95 virtual machine. It's gonna run in progressive web app. If you think you're gonna have more, you are wrong, right? If Windows 95 could run, you could run, right? This is Windows 95, across platform Windows 95. You're running on ARM too for the stuff. And you can share, yeah, you can also load and save the state and insert your plugin video image and then just copy out. So you have Windows 95 even works in your virtual machine. That is the entire of the video. Thank you for watching.